Okay, I think we're live now for the 33rd edition of the Data Value Show. Today's show, the value of the data truth bomb. And today I'm very lucky to have Jesse Anderson. Welcome, Jesse.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. So I was fortunate enough to meet Jesse a couple of years ago, I think 2022 in Lisbon. I was doing a recce over there. Joe introduced us and we took a very, very nice restaurant. But the conversation was very interesting and resonated with me quite a bit. And then more recently, I saw you in Day-to-Day Texas and some of the things that you presented on that conference. I think it'd be great to chat about and share our views on that. But for the audience, do you want to give yourself a bit of an intro, a bit of background?
Sure. So my name is Jesse Anderson. I'm the managing director of Big Data Institute. Since I'm independent, I get to say and think what I should do and what should be done. And I don't think people understand the importance of, not just for when you're speaking, of having a neutral point of view, but when you're actually doing the implementation. If you have a very specific either bent or proclivity or partnership, fill in the blank, you're going to get that default. And I think that that's a big problem in our industry. And I guess that comes back from my time at Cloudera. So I was early on at Cloudera. And it was nothing against Cloudera, but I did see that when you asked a question, when a client asked a question, what should be done, it was which of Cloudera's products should be doing that. And whether that was the right product or not was not the question. It was which of our products is going to do it. And you see this quite prevalent in the industry.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we both observed is, the technology's chosen before we've actually got the requirements. And and depending on who you ask, you'll get that maybe biased view of which route to go. So and it's great being independent. So we have allegiances to some partners, but we like to keep ourselves, or we like to believe that we only. I think I use this one. I'm a salesperson. Well, architect first became a salesperson. So unfortunately, I can only sell what I think architecturally is the right thing to do. Well, from my point of view, anyway. So with that in mind, and mentioning technologies, and we know that the world's evolved from the cloud era, the Hadoop stack. And I think that's the first thing that we touched on, especially on your presentation. The first bullet we got here was, how do you stay relevant in the data world? And I think you touched on it. It's not aligning yourself with the technology as such. It's aligning yourself with solving a problem. So yes, I tell you a question for you, and I know you presented some of this. How as data professionals in this fast-paced, Gen AI fueled world we live in now, how do we stay relevant as data professionals?
We stay relevant because as you see the various changes, the cycles over time, you see a consistent thing, and that is we need people who are smart, who can solve problems in data. That's what it is at its core. And so these tools, as you mentioned, those are tools that are there to solve a problem with data. And if you can't do that, that's a problem. And if you can, then that's a good thing. So there's a big difference between somebody asking the question is, we just mentioned Hadoop or Spark, or saying, how is Spark different than Flink? So if you're already an expert or quite knowledgeable about Spark and then understanding Flink, it's not as big of a jump. Definitely a jump, but it's not as big of a jump. And then there's also the early issues that we had of people not knowing anything about big data, anything about these data systems or distributed systems, saying, what is this thing? That's a very different question than how is this different than the other one? And as we stay relevant within them, your jumps will be much more lateral, maybe a little bit up, but they shouldn't be that very high hockey stick if we're doing this right. One of the important parts of that is, for example, a Snowflake. If your skills are around Snowflake and you just have those SQL skills, the learning of these new technologies is going to be a hockey stick, unfortunately, because you need to learn how to code, you need to learn how to architect, and if you can't do that, the next level for you will be a significant step up.
So I think just playing that back, it's always learning, always keeping on top, and not having an emotional attachment to maybe a technology or vendor that you've been working with, but looking to see how the market's changing, and making sure you can understand that, even converting it into old money language. So okay, how I used to do it in Oracle was like this. How does it translate to the new technology, maybe Snowflake or Databricks or wherever the next leveling up of your technical skills.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gen AI. I talk about Gen AI in the talk. It's worth mentioning. I don't know if you have the link in the comments, but it's in my YouTube channel. If you go to tiny.jesse-anderson.com/YouTube, it will take you to my channel. And then one of the most recent videos is my day-to-day Texas video. But I do talk about Gen AI because that's on everybody's mind. So there's obvious part of how do you do data engineering with LLMs. That's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about how Gen AI and code generation is going to change data engineering. And I think it's going to make the senior engineers more productive. And I think it's going to be harder for the junior engineers. I think that from the management point of view, the managers are thinking, oh, we can get rid of all of our senior engineers because this LLM will write our senior engineer code. That's not the problem. The problem, in my opinion, has never been the code writing per se and a lot of the boilerplate. It's always been the difficulty of solving the problem. And the Gen AI does not solve the most difficult parts of the problem. It solves a certain part, some of that boilerplate generation of the code. The other problem is that I'm zero for naught for many times, or I have tried many times to have Gen AI write some code for me in the data space, both in Python and Java. And there's always a very subtle bug in there that takes far longer to find and figure out than it did to write the code. So if you had written the code correctly initially, you would have avoided that. And that's a pretty big problem, actually, that I don't think has been talked about is the data code from the code generation is by and large plausibly right. At first glance, it all looks right. And you're thinking, oh, wow, great. Finally worked this time. But then there's the problem of it actually working 100% of the time. So I shared in my slides a thought that I think people should repeat to the business, and that is that people expect code to run in 100% of the time and 100% of the use cases with 100% accuracy. And the LLM code does not do that yet. Will it maybe in 5 years from now? Maybe. But as of right now, we can't do that.
So, and we did touch on this earlier, and it's something I've been thinking about on my career journey, and training the next generation of engineers. And I think we could create skills famine, because if ever the learning process normally is trial and error, and also structure to it. So as you go through the code, you're actually working out what's happening at each of those steps. We've been fortunate enough, been working around long enough. We've had to do it ourselves. And if you ask me now to write an SQL script, I haven't done it probably for a while, but I can still probably handwrite it. It'll compile probably. If it wasn't, it'd be one little. But it's because the regular activities of performing that, it has given me that core skill that I can always go back to. We're going to have the stage where we've prevented the need for people to go and do that. When they do need to go and debug things, it's going to be very hard for not someone that hasn't actually had that structured learning. Do you agree with that sort of hypotheses?
I do. There's a certain sort of um, part to your learning of that journey that you have to go on. You have to have spent some time in an upward hill, an upward climb. If you look behind me,
Hmm.
you can see. Let's see. Go this side. It's Sisyphus there, right? It's right
Yeah.
there. You have to push that boulder up a hill a few times. And if you've never pushed that boulder up a hill, you will never have understood what a Sisyphean task is. And that's
Hmm.
exactly what you're going to have to do. Debugging is
Yeah.
a Sisyphean task. And to get good at it, it's not you've seen the videos of feeding a bunch of code in and then it figures out what the bug is. But there's also this experience that comes along with that of having debugged many different things
Hmm.
over many years to be able to say, I'm going to start there. That's probably
Yeah.
the problem right there. I'll start there rather than I'm going to boil the ocean and look for it everywhere.
Yeah. And I think the other, I think again I mentioned when you were on your talk, it was the the fall of the architect, or the lack of architecture, design, runway, oversight, that's happened over the recent years. I do see that it's coming back a little bit, and people being more aware of, you need to actually have a target design to work towards, rather than working it as we go along. But again, going back to the future we're fastly approaching, of lot of code being generated by LLMs and being generated from a prompt. But that's great to solve point solutions, individual problems. But we talked about monolith codes in the past, and how you break these things down. Without a clear understanding about what everyone's doing in your team, you're going to create a situation where they're all using code generators to create certain things. But is it all going to join up in a data model? Have they actually done the data model that can be shared across all of these different pieces? So, yeah, if we are going to start relying on Gen AI to solve all our problems, I think we need to step a step back and say, at least give Gen AI an opportunity to succeed. So, what are we actually building? Where are we going with this? And what is the role of each of these components? What functionally are each of them doing? I think without that, we are going to get into uh, a right mess of unsupported code, and probably one big monolith that's being put into one pull request that's five people who all worked on different things, and not actually everyone knowing what where the overlap is, or what each of them is actually responsible for doing piece of code.
Yeah, Val makes
Yeah,
an interesting point or question about, well, so what do we do with the junior engineers? I think that
yeah,
we actually have that problem. We're going to have a
yeah.
problem that you were just talking about it takes a lead time. Uh, with recent title inflation, people who now have senior titles after 2 or 3 years, I think that's total BS. You can't be a
Yep.
senior person after 2 or 3 years of programming. That's total title inflation.
Hmm.
That's a whole different problem that's happening right now. But so
Yep.
these junior engineers, I'm worried that people will never not just have the opportunity or the reason to do it, but not have that opportunity where that the senior engineers will treat a code generation or an LLM like a bunch of junior engineers. That's a general idea I have of how this would work. Is your it isn't it, I don't think it's going to be the inverse. I don't think it's going to be a junior engineer that's acting where the gen AI can act like a senior engineer or a lead engineer.
Hmm.
I think it's the other way around, where the senior engineer goes through and really makes themselves much more productive by having a bunch of bots doing junior engineer work. So then the
Yep.
question becomes, why should they go into this field? Why are they going to get a job? Will they ever be able to get this production experience? It's going to be an issue.
I think so. I think so. I think it's a ticking time bomb, because you know, or that I'm not going around forever, and you know, the ability to pass on that knowledge that I've gained from real life experiences. If you know, there's two ways of people learning it. You know, you can learn from people that can share their experience and rationale why they've done something, not just say I did it like this. You need people to understand the thought logic of why you've made a particular decision, and then they can challenge you as well, because you know, sometimes it's always good to have things verified. But you know, with that gap going, how can the current engineers that we have at the moment make that step up? And I think you touched on this as well, is you know, the skills that we're teaching people. You know, what's relevant for us to, or engineers to learn now, that will help them move to that world where, you know, that they're acting as that more senior person that then is using Gen AI to help facilitate the heavy lifting, so to speak. So yeah, it's how we can create that environment to allow them to, you know, step up. I think it's the soft skills. That's what I was getting to, that you mentioned. So it'd be great to hear your, again, on the presentation, talked about this. Give us an overview of where soft skills are important, and how we can maybe help level up people in these skills to make them more relevant.
The soft skills are one of the most difficult parts, and oftentimes for us as engineers, the most probably viewed as the least important, which is odd.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about, as we come up as software engineers, you could often get by without talking to your end customer. You could write that thing, it would work, it may work. But I think with data, I think our hard parts are twofold. Is one is writing the code, and the other one is, did it solve the business problem? Did it do what you were trying to do? Where it's much less of a pass fail as we had in software engineering. Data is much more nebulous. Do you need another field? Do you need another this? Do you need another that? Where it's not a true false of what we got or what we created. It's much more of a, well, it was this, and I need this, and I need that. So the point being is, as we look at our soft skills are what are going to allow us to do that and allow us to work with our business. So when we do this in data, we need to have a direct conversation with the end customer. As I encourage people to watch the talk, because I actually showed and modeled that behavior. I realized I had been saying for many years, talk to the business, but I'd never modeled how we talk to the business. So I actually got a person to come up on stage and show this, where sometimes we find that people are advocating for a data product owner. I advocate for that as well. Now the issue is that we've tried to kind of pawn that some of those social skills and some of those questions off onto that person. That person is now responsible for all the communication to our business, and that shouldn't be that way. I've found very clearly that the more layers we have, the more insulation we have between the person writing the code and the person with the problem, the less likely we are going to get that problem solved correctly or quickly. So what we need is a much more like this. We need our data engineer working with the business. And this is where that soft skills really comes into play, is if you're an absolutely terrible with soft skills, you're going to have a difficult time with that. And that can be an absolutely a big improvement for you to do that. So one of the other concepts I would encourage people to understand is there's a Pareto effect in our careers. So that 80% of our work comes from 20% of something. So if we put a lot of work into our technical skills, there's a payoff of that initial payoff to that 80%. That's a pretty big jump. But that long tail of that last 20%, it takes, you get to becoming like yourself, gray hair, or having a long beard like me before you get to that last 20%. But maybe what we can do is we can get people actually better by hitting them to that 80%. Don't get me wrong, continue on your journey to that last 20%, but also go and hit those soft skills, because that in tandem, your hard skills, your hard technical skills, along with your soft skills, that's what's really going to get you ahead. And that's really what's going to create that business value.
It's all like I like the term the force multiplier. For every like point you make on that soft skills piece, it actually provides you, an additional benefit for the technical skills, because you can not only communicate the reason and rationale why for something from a technical perspective, you're actually able to understand from the business why they're trying to do it as well. I'm going to go slightly off topic here.
Before you jump off on that, you and I talked about afterwards about doing a class for people for data engineers. So I will throw it out to the people both listening live as well as whoever watches this later on. Please reach out to us. I really want to gauge people's interest in this. If there is enough interest, I would do that, because I think that I don't think you can just take a straight soft skills course. I think that there is something very specific to data, because we need to know, we're trying to bring in our technical skills on data as well as into the problem specific to data. If you watch the talk, there were very specific things within data that I had to do. So in that case, I had them say, well, what about real time? I want real time. Using my soft skills, I was able to talk him through, did he need real time? So if you've ever felt or been in that situation, instead of dictating to the business and saying, you asked for real time, you don't need that, you're stupid. If you can get them to a place where they realize it themselves and they say, oh, I don't need that, that's far, far more effective than you kind of crossing your arms and saying, you don't need that.
Yeah, no, and fully support that. And anyone, please reach out to us. And Jesse, I'd happily collaborate on that. I think it's, I think it'd be a game changer for certain people, and it would definitely make people improve how they perform in their current roles, or even if they're moving into that. I think Paul's just put a comment on here. Paul Sargent, hey Paul, talking about an opportunity here. So could generally be part of a lean team that junior engineers get to work with senior engineers. I think, that's what we need to be able to do is combine the two things. And maybe it's part of a boot camp hackathon or something like that. You get pair programmers, one writes it manually, one writes it over, they swap over. I think there's definitely some thoughts that we can do on that, Paul. So it's linked slightly to this soft skills anyway, but we've and modern data stacks, get some bad press. So we're rebranding it now, and thinking about this, the operational world doesn't seem to have this reinventing itself, or these eras of the platform. There may be some elements, like SOA, microservices. There's certain things that have changed over time, DevOps being introduced, but fundamentally you don't hear, what operational. I've got a big data platform, a big data operational system, or I'm gonna, the modern operational system or the postmodern operational system. It's your operational platform. And at the conference, there was some interesting town hall debates that we had where we're talking about the future of data engineering. Will data engineering exist as a role in the future? And I think Sol brought it up, and there was a bit of a debate between Sol and Joe. And stepping back and thinking a bit more about, how operational world, data world, they've been very separate. They've been coming closer together. And data ops methodology and it being now very much part of a integral part of your business, the data part. I'd like to see that you just have an engineering team. That engineering team, you don't distinguish between whether a data engineer or a platform engineer. They are, or an operational platform. They are just your engineers, or your platform engineers. And I like to think it's probably three cogs. I'm going to draw this up at some stage. So you've got your operational cog, which will have your CRM, your ERP, your marketing systems. You know, each of them. You'll have your data platform, which is made up of your ingest, your storage, your visualization, your quality aspects, and then you've got the third cog, which is the business. You know, you've got sales, marketing, finance. Anything that they do from the business perspective, you know, it should just be a change that the change is made by the team that looks after both the operational aspect and the analytical. I think why it hasn't happened up until now, it's been the differences in the technology, differences in the way people work. I think with some of those obstacles being removed, you know, storage being able to deal with OLTP and OLAP in the same place with different views on it, you know, the future probably will, but not that distant future. But I think that's when, you know, so those soft skills become even more relevant, because you need to be able to translate those business requirements, get some of those business requirements to look at both sides of the coin. You know, your operational and analytical in one project, one initiative, you know, one team. What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts on how long it'll be till the two worlds come together and we stop talking about data and operational systems separately?
I think it's for me. It's about using. I mentioned it during my talk about solving unsolved problems, and focusing on not solving solved problems. And to answer your question more directly, is teams who are trying to spin up their own infrastructure are solving solved problems.
Yeah.
And so if we have a large operational team spinning up our own, let's just say for the sake of argument, Databricks Spark cluster, it's a solved problem. You're spending a lot of time on something that is a solved problem that could be done a better way, especially, that this is all assuming cloud, obviously. On-prem would be a different story, but if your ops team is spinning up your own Spark cluster, they're spending time on something that shouldn't be done. So now, to bring that full circle into your question of what happens, I think how that happens is that the sheer amount of infrastructure that people go through and manage themselves shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until we get this place in time where the operations people are fewer, smaller, so it makes sense to merge them into, so that we have a single team all working on this together.
Yeah, it's that one team view, isn't it? Really, I think we've been finger pointing in the past. You know, it's the business problem, it's the operational systems problem. In general, it's a company problem, and you all work for that company. So yeah, and I've got some other views on that. I think organisation structures probably don't help with that and things like that. But there's many reasons and challenges that create that situation. But I'd like to think that that's where we should be heading towards at some stage. But
you're right. We're not thinking about problems as data products until we start thinking about problems as data products. Whether that's a problem in the code, whether that's a problem operationally, it affects the data product the same way. And so we have to have to be thinking in those terms.
And I think you touched on it just a minute ago about solve problems, and I think this is where that architecture lens comes into it as well. And engineers love engineering. It's in the name. And if you bring an engineer on and all he's got to do is go and plumb Fivetran into connections, or connect an API to a CRM system, it's not probably the role they thought they were going to be doing. Although, from a business perspective, it's what we want them to do, because you don't want them to go and spend time on solve problems. The amount of times I've seen people build their own ETL frameworks, from scratch, and then the people go afterwards, and no one's left to support it. And then it's like that hidden cost, because no one's totaled up how many days you've been working on it, how long has it taken us to create this, what's the missed opportunity we've had because we waited this long rather than going buying something off the shelf. So yeah, I think there's that architecture, and I think it leads on to the second bullet point we have there, is that product mindset. So I think ideally, you again, from the skills, we talk about soft skills being a key thing. I think that product mentality, product delivery approach is another key skill set to understanding. I think it's also the architecture piece, and if you can get level up as an engineer, if you level up in those places as well, your career path is going to be more insulated, because you're going to always provide value for the business, because, as you say, you solve problems for them. You solve problems for them quickly and successfully, they're always going to come back to you.
Yeah, that's what we're there for in the end. And I think that you're right about, so if you're in that situation where you're thinking that job was much more technical, and here you are doing ETL and doing low level stuff, or high level, depending on how you look at it. You see that on Reddit all the time. I was hired to this. They were told me that I was going to do this, and now I sit and I run SQL statements all the time. You may have been suckered into that, quite frankly. You may, there's a lot, try to figure that out up front. But I think this is also important for managers to know that if your team is bored, you may not be able to give them a shiny new toy for production, but it may be important to give them something that's challenging. Otherwise, they will start to quit. Your skills will atrophy if you aren't doing something that's more interesting. So try to make sure that you have some level of trade-off there.
Yeah. I think on my presentation, I did a picture of mountain, and I was talking about different use cases, and then I had the R&D park. So for doing your trial and error, trying things out in a controlled environment, and I think that's critical to give that balance. If some innovation, and I suppose it's where you look for that innovation, and if your team understands that, okay, as a company, we need to be more successful, make our clients happy, and obviously be rewarded for that. If your team's able to know that for us to meet those targets, and that we've had to do things, buy off the shelf products, but we have an opportunity to go and work in our hackathon, 5 days a quarter, working on a prototype, looking at new products. I think that can create that balance of learning new things as well as the BAU activities. But I think you're right in the fact that people get missold jobs because maybe the managers don't actually know what skills they need, so they go and create a big long list of all these technical things because they know that they've got everything to say. I think the thing they're missing is you're hiring these people to solve problems. So what you should really be doing is testing their problem-solving skills. The technology they've used is a byproduct for them actual, or a facilitator for them actually solving that problem. So I think we should hire people to solve problems, not as much knowing they have some technical skills they can use to solve that problems, but probably less focus on understanding the syntax for some Python library, I think.
Yeah, in fact, that's what I do when I interview. So I'll interview people for companies. That's one of the services that's part of the mentoring we do. And so what I do when I interview is I'm not saying, here, write a bunch of code for me. It's actually about solve this problem. Let's talk through a problem. And then what I do is, instead of that problem just being here's a one and done for it, we actually talked about, okay, what are the trade-offs to this problem? What are the optimizations
Yeah.
to this problem? Why would you choose one trade-off, one versus the other?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying, okay, now write this code, because you can't write that code that quickly. But what you can do is you can peer in and you can see their ability to solve that problem and understand, more importantly, understand this. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about before of the title inflation with these senior people. Senior people do not understand why they're making the choices that they are. And that is the definition of what a senior engineer should be able to do. The senior engineer should understand why. Maybe a junior engineer would know what, but they won't know why. A senior engineer should know why. And so what I'm trying to do in these interviews is, yes, you have this title, senior engineer. Congratulations to you. Do you know why? And if they don't know why, then they aren't the right fit.
Yeah. And on that note, I think there's another skill that's in that as well. Is I used to put the Kobayashi test. So when I was interviewing, I think it's from the Star Trek film, and it's basically the unwinnable solution. So, giving a scenario where there is no right answer, and that happens sometimes. And the scenario I used to use was two opposing stakeholders that you'd never get them to agree. And I think in that interview process, people getting frustrated. They're going, "It can't be done." That is the end result we wanted to get to. You wanted to say, it's not possible. I think the guy that we hired was, he goes, right, I'll make this guy happy for a bit. Then after that, I'll make this guy happy for a bit. And I won't make them happy at the same time, but I'll keep them both on that journey, but matching it to an architecture runway that is going to achieve the company goals of consolidation in that case. So, I think, giving scenarios to people and how they deal with them is a much more beneficial test than testing their SQL syntax knowledge. I think
Is that called the Picard maneuver then? What he proposed?
Say sorry?
The Picard maneuver.
Yes, of course, yes.
Okay, I
So
was
I
saying
think one of them was
how big of a Trekkie you were. If you know the Picard maneuver, then you must be a big Trekkie.
Is he the one? He cheated, didn't he? He cheated He
used light
cheated
speed
the
to be
game.
in two places at once.
So maybe that option's out there, and well, if I use that interview thing again, maybe I'll find the answer to keep these two stakeholders happy, or these fictitious stakeholders, should I say? So I think I'm going to one of the other points that we made as well is that, and I think you called this out, and I think it was really, really, really great to hear that statement. Well, as data influencers, data, whatever you want to call it, evangelists, or data professionals that have voices, we need to be giving realistic advice to people. And linked to that, ironically, we made a bit of a joke about it. Okay, we should do the boot camp for soft skills, but there's thinking that you can go on a boot camp for 8 weeks, linking to that career progression thing you're talking about as well, and just by doing that boot camp, you're going to go and get a job at a phone company for £300,000, dollars even. Sorry, I think it's a reality check. So we both know that you're not going to go do an 8-week boot camp, come out and go and get the high bucks. And if your motivation is just on that end dollar thing, I think your career choice or career motivation is tainted, really. I mean, it's always great to earn good money, but you need to enjoy what you do. You always need to be good at what you do as well. And you have to have passion about what you do. So, I think any advice there, don't chase the senior title, don't chase, maybe think you was going at the boot camp to go and get the higher bucks. Look to see what you really enjoy doing. And, you'll probably find your career path will move quicker, because naturally it's what your passion or your how you work, rather than just trying to chase some big ticket jobs, which just going to boot camp is not going to make you achieve.
It is. It's a major problem in the industry because we're seeing the cycle. That was kind of the crux of the talk was I'm going to tell you what's going to happen into data engineering in the future, because this same cycle has happened in data science and data warehousing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is these hype cycles of don't work on your skills. This is all easy. You can learn this in 8 weeks, or you can do this quickly. None of that, all of that is BS. It's all BS.
Yep.
And I know that because I have trained people who've actually gotten jobs at Google and Apple. So I know what it takes. These people were pretty stellar to begin with, and they came in through my class and they applied themselves really well, and they were able to do it. The average person will not. The other thing I think that's key is that not everybody should go to FANG, mostly because they kind of suck, and because they're looking for certain people. There's a lot of things, and it's and more importantly, data engineering there means something different. So data engineer at Facebook means more of a SQL person. They know SQL. They don't necessarily know how to code. And that was because a platform engineer at Facebook did a lot of the hard parts for them. They've never had to deal with those hard parts. So they just wrote this in product, and a lot of the piping and infrastructure was all done for you. So when somebody tells me I was a data engineer at Facebook, that's when I know I need to press more, because I know that they didn't face the hard parts. Another part that I think is really, really important for anybody who's on this, and that is once again, that title inflation. Somebody who's never been at a job more than a year and a half has never faced the fallout or the downsides or the problems to their decisions, because they've never been there long enough to see it actually go into production, long enough and say, oh, we messed up there, and we messed up there, and we messed up there. Those are problems that take 2 or 3 years, maybe more. When you're doing a second version or a third version, then you're able to actually learn from that experience. And so some of the influencers I've seen, they've never been at that company long enough. They've had significant title inflation. And so they're what they're going to do is they're going to pass on this cookie cutter approach, or this lack of understanding approach to engineering. And that scares the S out of me, because kind of what we were seeing in the chat of, if you think AI is bad, just wait till we tell people, here's the wrong thing to do, because that person didn't understand what it was in the first place, and they're giving bad advice. So generational loss, you get this one generation that gives you bad advice that becomes worse, generation becomes worse. It's a downward thing, and this is what scares me about data engineering. We're on a bad path.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think another observation is that, again, looking at my career and how I've learned, I learned more at smaller companies that you had the full autonomy, or you had the full 360 view of what was being done. I'm probably moving, in more recent years, it's probably harder to find that, because the data professional role is as fragmented. You don't get. I think I'm a BI engine or BI architect, I think it was, but we'd install the web server, the database server, as well as get the requirements, as well as do the data modeling, as well as doing the ETL, as well as doing the reporting structure. Anyway, that's probably a rare thing nowadays, or unless you're a very small company. And then, unfortunately, if you're a very small company, you don't have the mentors or the people that can show you how to do it properly. So, looking at a sweet spot of companies that you're going to have an environment to learn is probably a good consideration when looking at where we go. Especially if you want to future-proof yourself, the more exposure you've got to the complete picture, the more benefit you're going to get, and you probably learn the soft skills more as well, because you've had to communicate quite a bit with lots of different stakeholders.
If you look back, there was a Reddit thread that I responded to where somebody was saying, I'm not getting paid well at my job. Should I leave? And I said, and they also said something about not learning anymore. And I said, you don't leave a job because you're not being paid well per se. Maybe you should, But the reason that they should have left that job is they stopped learning. And that is what's going to kill you, especially early on in your career.
And yeah, so I've said this quite a few times as well, is that, retrospectively looking back, I only stayed in a job long enough I was learning a new technical skill or new domain skill. And as soon as that company needs you for your internal knowledge of how they operate, time for you to move on, because they need you more, you need them, and those skills aren't transferable. It's only useful for that one company. So yeah, fully support and agree with that approach. Is drive thing off learning. If you can negotiate your pay rise, or if you're not, it'll be paid appropriate for the market rate. But yeah, the main thing is, if you're still learning, you're still enjoying it, and you can afford to live. It's probably not the you probably should stick it out while you're learning. So looking at some of the, I'm going to go back to the one we talked about architecture and product mentality. So Greg did a great presentation. We're talking about whether you're an AI product manager or a product manager. And I think at a high level, how he described it is, if the product works without AI, you're just a product manager. If AI needs to be a part of the product, you're an AI product manager, which is an easy way of distinguishing it. But and we talked about internally, we started thinking of features and products that we're releasing, and what a data product is. We can look at what the definition, and I had Malcolm Hawker on the other day, which is had his views at a very high level. So it's a collection of objects that solve a problem collectively. whether you're actually selling that to a client as a product or as a data, or whether it's facilitating or a problem organization for optimization, or adding different functionality for a client that means that they're stickier and they're not going to go anywhere. Yeah, it is all a product base. I think it goes hand to hand with architecture. So if you don't have that view of that where you're going to go as an organization, like architecture runway, it's very hard it's harder for your product managers to work out, okay, how can I get to this big shiny product I want to get to, but iteratively, by doing it in bite-sized chunks, and maybe using that collection of other other initiatives that may be happening in your organization to say, okay, I'm going to use this as a vehicle to get me to the next stage, where I can use this as but again, I think that needs an architecture vision. And I think the problem we've been getting for them is it's not being set at the high level by the C-suite of what they want to achieve. So up until now, as data people, have very much driven from a technology-driven approach where we think, we need this great shiny platform. How do we change that? So the management is giving a 2-3 year vision of what they want to do as a product. So we can stop doing just point solutions. We can start creating a path to unlock that value quicker, faster, with less money.
I think it comes down to that definition of the data product. So my definition of a data product is data that's exposed with the right infrastructure or the right technologies. And the reason why that's an important shift is it's not saying this data product exists in one place, which is the database, more often than not. So for most of our career, it was let's just say a table, or perhaps even a database within the database. But more often than not, with big data, with our distributed systems, or especially for AI, we need that exposed in several different ways. We may need that in a database, and we may need that in real time with a pub sub, Kafka, Pulsar, etc. We may need that in a columnar database. We may need that Cassandra, for example. So if we think about it in those settings, or from that lens, we're now able to say, oh, we're missing this way of exposing that data product. And then you can then circle back and start to ask that question of, okay, business, you asked for things faster. What does faster mean to you?
Mm-hmm.
How fast is fast? If you want to see how those questions are asked, I did those on stage of,
Yeah.
okay, you say fast. What do you mean by fast? Do you mean 30 seconds? Do you mean a minute? Do you mean 30 minutes? Faster. Uh, so but what's important here is when I give these sort of technical things, people will often say, well, I don't know what that value is. And you don't. I don't expect engineers to know what the value of doing real time versus batch is, because we're engineers. I do expect the business. But what I do expect the data
Mm-hmm.
engineer to do is to ask the business that question of, what is the value of
Yeah.
doing batch versus real time? And so this is where engineers often get sort of wrapped around the axle of saying, I don't know. Well, you ask the business, you hold their feet to the fire and say, okay, if we do this, there's going to be an inherent cost to doing real time. This, my time, infrastructure. And more often than not, the business doesn't understand this. And so we need to be talking in terms that the business understands of, this is what this will cost. This will cost
Yeah.
6 months and €1 million a year. Okay. And now, if you look at that and you say, okay, well, it's only going to drive 100,000 of revenue, that's a non-starter. But if the business can
Yeah.
tell you it's going to be 10 million pounds, 50 million, whatever number, then you can start to say, oh yes, this actually makes sense. And we can
Yeah.
change that, and we can change that the discussion rather than the dictation. It's a two-way conversation, being able to say,
Yeah.
oh, you want this, you want that direction. Okay, in order for me to hit that direction, this is what I need.
Yeah. I just wrote down some there. It's like commercial awareness. It's that thinking of, and from both sides, because an engineer that likes engineering, he hears, oh, I've got a real time project. I can put that in my CV. That's going to make me. They're not even going to question it. They're going to go, right, let's go and do it. And I think that's the lacking of the commercial awareness aspect of, okay, well, let's flip that round. If I go and build this myself, we're not going to get this out there before the year end, which means we're not going to make our target, which means I'm not going to get my bonus. So you start thinking it that way, people make different decisions that are linked to the business strategy, which I think everything we should in an organisation should be linked, underpinning that business strategy and helping to improve the performance against any metrics that are being set at that level. I think we've got a 5 or so minutes left. I think I'll put the link to your show on the chat afterwards. I highly recommend everyone looking at the getting the real requirements techniques. I think it was a really eye-opening and a common situation I've seen many times in the past. I think probably the closing one, and we've probably alluded to this as we've gone through, is what can the data community do better? So what can we do to help the next generation of data professionals, help get data a better name. We've been tarnished with failures. We keep reinventing names for stuff. What can we do to get the business buy-in now and service the customers better?
There are two things that I ended my talk with, and it was two things that are, I think, if we do them, we'll be able to turn this around, and if we don't, then we're kind of screwed. And one is, we need to talk to the business. Simple as that. Are you talking to the business? And this is key, because if you aren't talking to the business, you aren't creating value. You have a big disconnect. One of the most clear things in my consulting that I see are clear problems, consistent problems, is that person A does not talk to person B. There's intermediaries in between there. There's D, E, F in between. And the more people, it's a game of telephone, and it's unclear what they're doing. It's unclear value creation. We need to be working directly with that customer.
Yeah.
The second part is to start mentoring people. One of the issues I have with the influencers is that they're content is often either incorrect, but everybody gets stuff wrong, wildly incorrect sometimes. But it's more importantly, it's useless. It's really go nowhere drivel. And that's a problem because go nowhere drivel is where we should be if we're doing so incredibly well we can just kind of coast, and this is what we're doing. We've done everything, we can just coast. We're not at that point. We're not remotely at that point. We need to be improving, not just as individuals, but as a community, where there is a community perception where if we all so to do this, we look at data warehousing as an industry. How many startups are doing data warehousing? That's a question I ask, and I asked it then. So in the past 10 years, I had one person raise their hand that they heard of a startup doing a data warehouse. That's an issue because data warehouses are not perceived as something that creates value and are necessary for new businesses. Now, what happens if that starts happening with data science? What happens if that starts happening with data engineering? This is an eventuality that will happen if we don't start turning this around and start generating value. We will become the data warehouse. Maybe it's going to take 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, but we'll eventually become the data warehouse. And in the talk, I call out some of these teams. The data warehouse is the no team. If you ever want to be told no, you just go to the data warehouse team and they can tell you no. There's always some reason that something can't be done. Technical, governance, you name it, always no. And then we have the data science team. They're the mistaken for team. They're mistaken for people who could write the code and get something out. They're not. They're just not capable of doing that. And now we're here with our data engineering as we're the team we're not quite sure who we are. Are we supposed to be software engineers? Are we supposed to be DBAs? Are we supposed to be, well, I've strongly put forward my opinion that we need to be software engineers who know how to write software and who know how to write SQL, but we can't be just resting on our laurels with a bunch of SQL. That's just not possible. Otherwise, if we could have done the whole SQL thing, data warehousing would have been successful years ago. I think a key part of why data warehousing was not successful is the people could not solve problems both with code or solve complex problems because they were limited to SQL.
I agree. On that note, I think we're probably near approaching time. I'm back to back today, so I've got to get straight to another call. But we'll follow up on a soft skills post maybe afterwards, and just see if anyone's to test the water. See, I'd love to get people's opinions on that. What they think should be included in it, whether they think it'd be useful. And we can see what we can do to start helping the data community, at least with starting there at least. But if anyone wants to catch up with you, I think you mentioned your YouTube channel. I know you do a lot of speaking. Do you want to share maybe where people can catch up or see some of your content?
Yeah, if you go to my YouTube channel, there's another show, and that's part of my call to action to people is stop with this unsubstantial content, this drivel. And so I'm doing the opposite of that. I'm doing deep technical conversations, and it's called Unapologetically Technical. We will go and talk about the absolutely most technical things. The last one was the Billion Rows competition, where we talked about how you optimize doing reading in a billion rows. We go step by step. Somebody could actually understand that and learn. And that's key. What's key for me. So my YouTube channel is a great way. My website where I blog, jesse-anderson.com. I've got courses, but more of what I do is mentor companies, not just from a technical point of view, but also from that organizational point of view. You have to do both, in my opinion. But thank you so much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. It's always a pleasure, and always enjoy chatting. I mean, on that last note, something I did an article for. I think it's going into a book as just an entry, but it was information lifecycle management, and I brought it up to kind of thinking, what's that? And thinking, well, hadn't really needed it for many years. Of talk about that billion row table. How would you store those rows in a way that would be efficient from a storage perspective, from a cost of that storage as well, and the associated performance? And I think again, the learnings from that, you take that to the world now, where you got Apache Iceberg coming out with the different tierings. We're back again, and before someone goes and reinvents the wheel, say, hold on, we've done this before. It's called information lifecycle management. That how we can take the learnings and concepts from that and bring it to the modern world with the technology there. So fully support what you're doing, and it's some great work. Look forward to catch up with you again, and really appreciate your time on this show. So for the audience next week, I've got Paul Rankin on. I didn't get a chance to go and get the little image up, but the reason was I hadn't decided the title yet, but it'll be around team topology, probably have a data meshy sort of theme to it as well, but data products. So join in next week, and we can we'll be discussing something different. So hope to see everyone then. So we'll call it a wrap. Thanks again, Jesse. We'll
thank you.
Soon.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers.